Mike Florio joining us on the River Islands guest line, Joe Spadoni, alongside Joe Shasky, and we're just talking about the lack of urgency, or I guess that maybe they knew it and just didn't want to release it. I have no idea, but Ian Rappaport didn't tweet once about it yesterday. Jed York getting arrested over the weekend. Schefter, he had this little quote from Nick Wagoner, who had a story on it, but he didn't tweet anything about it. Did you find that all just odd?
No, the NFL owns 10% of ESPN. This is exactly what you get when the media outlets that cover the NFL are in bed with the NFL. That may not be the best pun for this situation, but we saw this coming. And the NFL acquired 10% of ESPN back in April. ESPN has tried from time to time to tell us that they're still going to engage in journalism. Well, it's one thing to check a box on a story that investigates whatever from time to time. But in the day-to-day drip of NFL news coverage, what they choose to highlight and what they choose to ignore will be two different things. And we're going to see that time and again. And it's part of what we need to be watching for from ESPN, because they need to prove to us that they've retained independence. And yesterday, I think the obvious verdict, which I fully expected, was they're not independent. They didn't cover this the way they would cover it if they didn't have a relationship with the NFL, pursuant to which the NFL owns 10% of ESPN, and ESPN now owns and operates NFL Network.
If this were a player of any magnitude, how would this have been covered?
I think it would have been covered more aggressively. It would have been discussed more extensively by ESPN. And, at the end of the day, that's what we're all going to be watching, and that's part of this story, and we'll see how closely ESPN covers this. The punishment of Jed York in comparison to what the punishment of a player would have been, because there's this lingering suspicion that even though in theory owners are held to a higher standard, in practice it seems that owners are held to a lower standard than the players. And that's the next move here, especially since the case is over. The NFL always waits for the legal process to end before it issues discipline under the personal conduct policy. This thing ended the day after it began. It's over. It's done. It's ripe for the NFL to do something. And I think the NFL probably will do something before week one. If there's going to be a suspension, they're not going to want him in Australia as part of the contingent that is waving the shield down under. They don't want that. And I think that there's no reason for them not, if they're going to suspend him, there's no reason for them not to do it quickly.
Yeah, I can't imagine him traveling to Australia. I can't. I'm thinking about just how rare this situation is in general, because obviously, Robert Kraft, who you referenced earlier, has been linked to certain things. I remember the Jim Irsay mugshot, but he wasn't wearing the oranges, if you will, the outfit.
Jumpsuit.
Yeah. The outfit. This is a pretty damning photo that I think is going to stick with Jed York a really long time. I mean, I've seen some bizarre headlines. This one kind of takes the cake.
Well, and the difference here, and somebody asked me about this yesterday as it relates to the fact that the Kyle Shanahan auto accident was kept under wraps for 11 days. It's a lot harder for the director of security of the local NFL team to reach all the way to Ohio and manage that situation and maybe get things tucked into a different file or get the brakes tapped on the posting of public records or otherwise just get law enforcement to cooperate. Palo Alto and East Palestine are two different universes as far as 49ers influence are concerned. So they had no control over this one. There was nothing they could do. He was caught, by all appearances, red-handed by virtue of the fact that he pleaded no contest a day later, and there was nothing that anyone could do to spin this, to manage this. And the only thing that he did in this that could be objectively characterized as smart is get it resolved as quickly as he possibly could.
Mike, I followed you a long time. I watched your 12-minute video that you did for NBC yesterday where you did the stand-up breaking down all of this stuff. I'm curious regarding Jim Irsay, Robert Kraft, now Jed York. Robert Kraft had a ton of equity built up in the league because of the respect and how well run his team was, how many championships they had. And he was also warring with Roger Goodell, it felt like, and there was a lot going on behind the scenes. I always got the sense that Jim Irsay was kind of sent out to be a very vocal anti-Goodell guy for many years, and it was because almost like he was a sacrificial lamb amongst the other owners. How will Jed York's influence in that ownership circle change with this information that's now landed?
I think everybody's going to look at him differently than they did before. How could you not? And with Kraft, there was one important difference that needs to be factored into this. His charges were dismissed because he was part of a broader sting operation where they had installed secret cameras in these massage rooms where people go in and undress to get a massage. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. That's what the courts found. It was an unreasonable search to have these hidden cameras. All the charges got dismissed because Kraft fought them. Usually when they bust guys in a situation like this, they want to resolve it quickly. They don't fight it. Kraft decided to fight it, and he exposed that there was overreach by law enforcement. So his arrest never became a conviction, a guilty plea, a no contest plea, a diversion program. So in the eyes of the law, he did nothing wrong. Makes it harder for the NFL to impose discipline. They still could have under the personal conduct policy. There have been players who've been disciplined without any arrest, any charges, even without any lawsuit filed. Ezekiel Elliott got suspended 6 games with no lawsuit, no arrest in 2017. But that's the big difference between Kraft and York. York pleaded no contest a day after it happened, which makes it impossible for the NFL to not suspend him. And to answer your question again, he is going to be viewed differently by everyone. By everyone. People have been asking me, could he be forced to sell? Hell, he may want to sell after this. I don't know how you come back from this if you're Jed York. Maybe you come back from it by cashing out and disappearing like Dan Snyder did.
Mike Florio, Pro Football Talks, is joining us here on the River Island guest line at Spadoni and Shasky, the Morning Roast. And Mike, what did you make of the 49ers statement yesterday? And this was the quote: "As this is a legal matter which has been resolved, we will not be providing any further comment at this time."
Well, it turns on the head the idea of saying, as this is a legal matter, we will be providing no further comment, because usually the thinking is it's pending. We don't want to say anything that could prejudice, undermine, impact in any way this ongoing legal proceeding. We're deferring to the process, and out of respect for the process, we're keeping our mouths shut. When you throw in which has been resolved, there's no reason to not say anything. It was the best they could come up with to justify saying nothing. That's how I interpreted it. They're not going to say anything. There's nothing to say. And I think the implication is, if they're not saying anything, if they're not saying anything and York's not saying anything, this is his opportunity. This is his platform to say anything that could make this ugly situation look better. And I think the fact that he said nothing, either directly or indirectly through the team, it just underscores the fact that the allegations, the no contest plea, everything we've seen reported from the public records, it's accurate. Because if it wasn't, this is a chance to say so.
Do you think if if Jed did come out and address the media or release a statement, I think as opposed to a notes app or something, because we see that all the time, a notes app statement, do you think if he addressed the media, any good could come of that?
It all depends on what he'd say, but I think for now he's probably rattled, he's shell-shocked, and I could see the strategy in the short term go away and let it die down. But you're never going to avoid that moment, which is the first time you talk about it. So the question is when, where, and how will be the first time that you talk about it. And I also suspect that probably wants to see what the NFL is going to do before he says anything. So, look, there is no science to PR. It's an art form, and you have to have people involved who have good instincts, who have good experience, and who can basically fashion a crystal ball out of whole cloth and come to a conclusion as to how things are going to go based upon what you say. But right now, I think he was still in jail yesterday. I don't know when he was serving day 2. He had already served day 1. I don't know if he was serving day 2 immediately, but yeah, he's going to have to decide with good input, good advice from PR professionals. How do you address this? When do you address this? What do you say? Because he's not going to be able to go the rest of his career without talking to reporters. And the first time he does, that's going to be the first question asked.
Yeah, no doubt. Mike, you do such a great job. It's like I always feel like you ask really pertinent questions out loud, and it gets me thinking. And so, I was watching your video again. I've referenced it now twice yesterday, and I was thinking about the Tony Romo body cam footage that came out little after the incident was reported. What else could come out detail-wise that could shape this conversation?
Well, you just mentioned something that, frankly, I hadn't thought of in the 24 hours since we've been riding this roller coaster. There could be body cam footage of Jed York's arrest that comes out. And, you know, it was a sting operation. I don't know how far they went in furthering this ruse that was aimed at luring folks who thought they were setting up these encounters. I don't know. But there may be some stuff that's on camera. There may be some stuff that's on tape. There may be some stuff that comes out later. That's an excellent point, frankly, that we need to just sit back and wait for. We think we know everything, but the one thing we haven't seen yet, and look at how the perception of Romo changed. It's one thing to know he got pulled over for suspicion of DUI. It's another thing to see that whole arrest, the apprehension, pulling him over, the ridiculous field sobriety test. And it wasn't until after that stuff came out that CBS dropped the hammer on him, if that's indeed what they're doing, by putting him on leave. So it could be that Jed's keeping his mouth shut for now because he knows there's a body camera a collection of videos that's going to come out that could make this even worse.
Yeah, I mean, my brain always goes to, like, we heard about the Ray Rice situation,
right? And then we
saw the video. We heard about Jordan
Video
Poole.
Changes everything.
Exactly.
Even if it confirms what we already know. You know, that's the thing about Ray Rice. We already knew that he had done something in that elevator to render his then fiance unconscious. But it's one thing to know it; it's another thing to see it. And hey, you know, that's a hell of a point. And I should have thought of it. That if there is body camera footage, holy crap, just, you know, fasten your seatbelt and get your popcorn because that's going to hit at some point. And it could be interesting, to say the least.
All right, so I do want to ask you some questions outside of this incident. The New York Times just dropped a huge piece this morning regarding CTE, and I'm just going to read you one element. I haven't had a chance to fully dive into it because we've been doing our show live as it dropped. 878 players died during this period from 2016 to 2021, and at least 215 of them had CTE. Of the remaining 663, 643 of those players' brains were not studied for the presence of CTE, which means the percentage could be even higher. Wow. I mean, this feels like a massive bombshell. And I'm a Niner fan, and so I watched over the weekend the Hall of Fame stuff. And Roger Craig, you know, basically told the world that he's dealing with a serious condition right now. And he basically admitted in his Hall of Fame speech it's because of football. And he wouldn't have done anything different. And football gave him all of this in his life. And it was very powerful. And I got teary-eyed. And I don't know where to go with this, man. I love watching football. I am complicit in talking about it and earning a living off the back of football. Yet I also understand how violent and how dangerous it is long term. I don't know how we reconcile this as a society and how they reconcile this as a league, Mike.
Well, there are so many different issues, and it's a complicated and nuanced situation. The sport is inherently violent. The sport is inherently risky. One of the questions raised by the New York Times in a separate article is why hasn't OSHA gotten involved? They're the federal agency responsible for workplace safety. But this isn't about removing hazards that are preventable and unrelated to the job and doing the job effectively. Doing the job effectively means getting injured, whether it's head trauma, whether it's broken bones, torn ligaments, whatever the case may be. You are going to get injured playing football. The question, I think, becomes at what point, if ever, do we reach a moment where people choose to not play football? And I think, and this is the point we made in the article we wrote about this, if and when they develop a test that will show CTE in the presence of living patients, it still can only be diagnosed in brain tissue from people who have died. If you could ever do a blood test, a brain scan, whatever, and know if you have CTE and what stage it's at, and you're still young enough to play football, what happens then? Will guys who get a positive CTE test stop playing? And what impact will that have when guys who are, by all appearances, perfectly healthy and fit and fine to keep playing start walking away. It's basically the Chris Borland situation times 1,000. Remember when he retired after 1 year? And there's a group of folks in the media who are rooting for and also hoping to be part of taking down this behemoth that is the NFL. That ultimately didn't catch fire. But back at that time, and on the heels of Congress forcing the NFL to take better care of players' brains and take better steps to make the game as safe as it can be, even though it's inherently unsafe, they were dealing with reduced participation at the youth levels. If you would have a mass walkout when guys find out they already have stage 1 CTE and they're going to tap out of the sport, that's when you have to worry long-term, are younger players going to not play, and are we eventually not going to have enough high-quality players who choose football? So this is something that's going to play out over time, but the tipping point would be a CTE test that can diagnose it in living patients who can then say, I'm not playing football anymore. I think that's when the findings from today would morph into something that would be a problem for the NFL.
Another big story, Mike, and Mike Florio here, Pro Football Talk, joining us on the River Islands guest line. Dae'Quan Wright situation is just kind of crazy. And, you know, and maybe it's not, just given the landscape of college football. I know the Big Ten announced this morning that they're going to, like, if you play in the NFL or you sign up or whatever, you can't come back to play in the Big Ten, whatever. But the fact that a college player could play in a preseason game as a pro and then go back and play at LSU for his old coach at Ole Miss, that being Lane Kiffin, it's just, I don't know. I don't even know if I have a question. Just the absurdity of it all, I think, is just on brand for what college football has become, Mike.
And don't blame the players for making business decisions that are now available to them. This is all a product of decades of antitrust violations that were the result of a system that, and it's very simple. All the various colleges and universities band together, they create the NCAA, and they go out and recruit players. And if you're a player and you say, well, I'd love to come play for your football team, but what are you going to pay me? They say, well, we can't pay you because of NCAA rules. They fixed the price of the labor force for decades, and that blew up. That was exposed, and it took longer than it should have, frankly, to be exposed as the antitrust violation that it is. And now everything they're doing is playing out in this reality where there's nothing they really can do because it is an antitrust violation anytime the NCAA tries to make rules. And in passing a rule earlier this year that players will now have 5 years of eligibility, the players who have already exhausted their 4 and would otherwise get a 5th, they're saying, hey, well, why don't we get one? And that's where this whole thing's coming from. This is the 5th year that a Dae'Quan Wright didn't have available to him when he entered the draft that he has successfully argued he should have had available to him, and that's how he's able to come back. So that's the reality. That's the thing that makes sense in something that seems so nonsensical. And so much of the sky is falling stuff from the conferences and from some of the coaches, you got to remember they're still trying to get an antitrust exemption through Congress. So this becomes performative. Brendan Sorsby, and now this. This is a way to get political momentum behind giving them the antitrust exemption they've been looking for, plain and simple. So I look at it all very skeptically. They want to spin the clock back to a certain extent to the days where the money was flowing to the schools, not to the players. That's exactly what they want to do, and the players aren't represented in this the way they should be. And the schools and the conferences are going to seize on any example they can to try to get the people behind the idea that we need to have an antitrust exemption so we can put real rules in place where the unspoken part of it is, and yeah, the players are going to make less money, and that money is going to be siphoned to the programs.